Oh wait, KK can chase you if you like.
Maybe, yeah. Sorry, you all figured out. I hope the little applications to the readings and stuff help make them more concrete, and that you'll take the handout and use the questions. I think they are useful to ask about diasporic texts. Yes.
Can you again elaborate on why PhilAm? I mean, because I think when you said that we are all diasporic, then to label this body of works as PhilAm, I find it a bit strange, because at the end of the discussion, everything disappears. So all of these boundaries disappear, which is expected because you're using a Buddhist reading of this text.
Mm-hmm.
So it's PhilAm but not PhilAm. Is that it?
Well, see, the thing is, the dichotomous reading of identity, right, is this whole self against the other. And so on the side of the self is identity, purity, and order. And they expel or abject contradiction, contamination, and chaos. So if you look at that in the American scene, so WASPs are identity, purity, and order, and all the other brown, yellow, and red people are chaos, contamination, and contradiction. But if from the other side, the diasporic Filipino American side, if you did the same thing, we're the diasporic ones and you're the sedentary ones, it's just a mirror image. So actually the action is different, because by showing the diasporic nature of Filipino Americans, ultimately they want to show that all bodies are diasporic, as in we all came from somewhere else, we're all on our way to somewhere else, and our bodies are compositions that are very heterogeneous, right? So the geneticists talk about how our DNA, genome, is a book of the dead, because it's a record of all the bodies that have led up to us over these millions of years of evolution. We're actually literally composed of all these bodies. So not just from this cultural perspective, there's no such thing as a pure cultural strand. From in your very genome, you're fully diasporic, right? So, does that make sense?
Yeah, so how do you classify whether a work is still PhilAm?
Whether a work is still PhilAm? Well, we still rely on conventional categories. So the Buddhist solution to that is this whole the absolute and the relative viewpoints. So in the absolute viewpoint, we're all diasporic. In the relative viewpoints, we can still use labels like Carlos Bolosan is Filipino American, Han is Filipino American, Jose Garcia Villa is Filipino American, Jessica Hagedorn, whom I don't like at all, but is Filipino American, right? So we still use these labels in the world. Those things don't disappear. Like when you're in the United States and you're a brown-looking Filipino, you're still Filipino, or sometimes Mexican because they don't know the difference. Sometimes black even, right? So that's kind of, I don't know if that's a cheating way to talk about it, but we still have to be able to talk about things, because in the ultimate dimension, then because we rarely work on this level of the genome or of the enlightened viewpoint, right? We deal with each other on a practical basis. So we still have passports. If you went to another country and say, I don't have a passport because everybody's diasporic, they wouldn't let you in, right? So there's still rules in the world and labels, right? Even though they're conceptually erroneous, really. Other questions? Yeah.
So clinging to identity and wanting to name ourselves as belonging, the Joker, that's illusion.
Yeah, no self.
Ah.
Yeah.
So similarly, wanting to cling to form, or even to talk about form, would also be an illusion.
Yeah, and I mean, as you see, when I talk about form, I end up talking about all these non-form things like representations of the body and history and all that stuff, which formalists would be like, no, you can't talk about history, that's historicist. No, you can't talk about what's going on in the plot. So a lot of the work that I'm doing is actually just not cling to form in a way, but again, you still really need these categories practically, and politically you might really need these categories. You might still need to have a group of Filipino Americans in one place in order to organize, or of gays, or whatever, right? So it doesn't mean that these things are defunct, but you have to be aware that you use them strategically for particular reasons, and they're not real in the world, they're conceptual. But that doesn't mean that you can't use them. Like when we teach our classes, we're still going to talk about meter and rhythm and metaphor, even though these are very narrow conceptions. But we have to, or we'll just be, if we're like in an enlightened classroom, we would just be in complete silence communing with a literary text. But that's not the case. Okay? So other
But then
questions?
the higher criticism would aim, therefore, to move beyond form.
The higher criticism, which do you mean like theological stuff? Is that what you mean by higher criticism?
No, actually, I was thinking the closer we approach Nirvana, there.
Oh, okay.
In the sense, that way, we would be aiming then to go beyond form.
Yeah, because I mean I think a really apropos image for this higher criticism is the Lotus Sutra, which is the sutra, the talk that the Buddha gave. When what he did was he just held up a flower, and then he didn't say anything, and then suddenly one of the people was enlightened, so he understood completely without speaking, because words are one of those things. In fact, the categories of identity really ultimately comes from language and grammar, right? Because in grammar you have to have a subject, and just because in grammar you have to have a subject, we assume that there is such a thing as an I in the world, but animals don't have language. They probably don't have this conception of an I. So, but you can't teach your classes by holding the Book of Faulkner up and you say, here's Faulkner, and it's over, right? Class dismissed. We have to talk about like what's going on, like, you know, so, and we have to use language, unfortunately, or fortunately. I mean, language is this gift and this burden and smiles, right? So, good questions though. Other things you want to ask?
Is there a particular film author that you have read more than others? Maybe you can evaluate whose body works, you can sort of evaluate in terms of
I've actually taught Linda Berry quite a lot, and I think she's great. She's an interesting case because her mother was half Filipino. And so her like Filipinoness is very removed, but then she talks about aswans and stuff like this, and stuff. So I think she's great to teach using these perspectives. I think Hanang is fantastic. So to teach Fixer Chow. I don't care for Jessica Hagedorn, but I think she's probably useful for that too. So
one of the older ones, like Carlos Mulosan.
yeah, I think he's great. Yeah, definitely. There's the kind of the seminal essay on her in the States is by I forget her name. She's Shaolin Wang is at Berkeley, and you could probably talk about Bulosan analogously to the way she talks about her using these particular terms, but of course she's using other critical terms. She doesn't use the whole Buddhism thing. And probably there'd be quite a bit of, here I don't feel that, I wouldn't be afraid of that, but in the States I think there'd be some hostility to this kind of approach because it would be considered religious, even though I'm not, doing a religious thing. I'm not like finding Christ symbols or things like that, but, that's still going to be considered the and one of the reasons why I'm here is I actually want to read Filipino text in English because to find out more of these texts that I can do more research on using these questions. I wish I could do also Filipino text in Filipino, but my Filipino vocabulary is reading vocabulary is quite low compared to mine. So yeah. So if you have suggestions or bibliography that I can make up to take back to Canada, that would be great. Because I would like to teach Filipino writing in English.